Tonight you're reading from your review book, the pages 140 to 141, and it's going to go over diffusion patterns. So when we're talking about diffusion patterns, we're still looking at patterns that we would see across the landscape. So how do people move different cultural processes? And if we're talking about culture, we have a whole unit on it, but to give you a basic idea, culture is really like what we care about. So culture is unique to humans. It's well, not true actually. It's unique to primates, but we've taken it to a new level. And with humans, like we teach culture, right? So whatever area you're born in, that's the kind of culture that you end up um, developing. So culture isn't something that's genetically wired into you. You're taught it. Um, and so we can spread our culture. And so you know that we have like the United States, we have lots of different cultural interests and lots of different foods that have been brought in by other people. And that's why we talk about how the US is the melting pot. So culture can move with people. And so again, we're looking for those patterns. So since people, ideas, and objects move via connections, we're going to talk about there's two main types of diffusion. First, there's relocation diffusion. Relocation diffusion is just when you relocate, you bring your culture with you. So when you're physically moving from one place to the next. Um, so like the movement of language, most languages are spread through relocation diffusion. A new group of people move in, their culture spreads, now we have a new language. So in the US, like why do people speak English in the United States? Because we had most of the colonial power in the US was from Great Britain. Um, why other places in the US where people speak Spanish more? There are places in the US that have always had more of a Spanish influence because they were originally settled by the Spanish. Um, and then also, there are places in the US that have higher rates of immigration from Spanish speaking countries and places that border, Spanish speaking countries. So, like along California and Texas and Arizona, where they're bordering Mexico, you're going to have more Spanish speaking people. You've got more people moving from one place to another, bringing their language with them. Most religions are spread through relocation diffusion, and we'll cover that in a few chapters as well. The second type is expansion diffusion, and that's when you're spreading the feature from one place to another in an additive process. So expansion diffusion is when a culture is spread, but it doesn't have to be spread with me moving to a new place. And this type of diffusion is more common now um, because of technology, right? Because of the internet, television, radio, cell phones, all of these things have made expansion diffusion more common. So relocation diffusion was one of the biggest ways to move ideas around before. And today we have expansion diffusion as well, which has always been there to an extent, but now this one takes off much faster. And there are three types of expansion diffusion. Um, so the first type is contagious diffusion. In contagious diffusion, it's a rapid, widespread diffusion of a characteristic. Um, Now, there are diseases that are spread through contagious diffusion, which I think makes sense, right? So the bubonic plague was spread through contagious diffusion, but ideas are spread that way as well. And like in this picture here, that kind of demonstrates that you have the original idea and everybody around them. So that person didn't have to move with their idea. The people around them were like, "That's a good idea," and they started using it. And then the people around them were like, "Hey, what is that? That's great. I'm going to start using it." And so it spread out like that. A lot of memes are spread through contagious diffusion. If you think about like trends, like the water bottle flipping a few years ago, contagious diffusion. Everybody just started doing it. Um, the fidget spinners. One day there were none. Next day, everybody had one in school. Contagious diffusion. The dabbing. Oh, the year of the dab. All of a sudden, kids were dabbing left and right everywhere in the hallways. Like all of these things are spread through contagious diffusion. And because I'm old and out of touch, like maybe I don't even know what the cool new thing is. It's being spread through contagious diffusion right now. But I'll find out in a couple years and I'll be able to make a new outdated video. Contagious diffusion, just again, and here it is in a map. Everybody nearby are impacted. So it can be a disease or it can be the spread of a new idea. The next type is hierarchical diffusion. Hierarchical diffusion is spread from a person of power or a node of authority or somebody who is influenced. So even if it's not like somebody with a huge amount of money or power, but somebody who has influence over an idea, it's spread. So here's a person of power, authority, or influence, or the group. It could be a city, doesn't have to be a person. And then these other cities or people who have power or influence adapt it, and then they adapt it, and then it keeps spreading down and further down. Fashion is a great example of this. And so so here you might have like New York, Milan, or Paris, big centers of fashion in the world, and they're going to have their big runway shows, and like 7 people in the world can afford to buy the clothes. I'm speaking hyperbole, obviously more than 7. But then it gets diffused to to other major cities and to very expensive stores, right? So now maybe it's in like a couture shop, and then maybe it's then spread to like a Lord and Taylor shop, which is very expensive. Then that same style maybe gets spread to things like an Express and a Macy's, and then you know Sears and J.C. Penney's, and then Target, which is where I buy it. Other things that might have spread like that would be types sometimes of music. So country music would have a hub in Nashville and then would spread out through other places. Um, some banking power. So as long as it's coming from a sphere of influence, and then it's going to be passed down to groups slower and slower and slower. And so here you can see these dark blue places are where this cultural trend would have started, and then it would have been passed down to the second group, and then this light blue group. And the next type we have is stimulus diffusion. And stimulus diffusion is a spread of an idea or principle, but it changes as it spreads. So you're probably most familiar with things like a new app or a new feature will come out on an iPhone, and then a couple phones later, all of a sudden, all the Android phones will have it, or vice versa. Like a Galaxy phone has a new feature, and in future generations of iPhones, they'll pick it up. So stimulus diffusion, they take something similar, but they change it a little bit. So in the case of phones, they change it so they don't get sued. Another good example would be like there's McDonald's all over the world, but if you go to like a McDonald's in India, they don't eat beef in India, so they would have lamb burgers or veggie burgers instead. Um, McDonald's in Beijing has like a giant pastry case and it looks really fancy. And so they take these ideas and they change them around. So here you've got the underlying principle, how it started, and here they took the same idea, but they changed it a little bit. So it went from point 1 to point 2, and now it's a little bit different. And then this group, whether it's a city or a group of people or a company, now they've taken that idea, but they've tweaked it. They've changed it just a little bit. And the same thing, this last group here has taken it and changed it a little bit. And so here you see the same pattern. You get the original ones. So here's your stimulus by state for job creation. And so here it starts here. And then these states took that same stimulus idea, like how to make more jobs, but they changed it. So they still wanted to use money to create new jobs, but they did it in a different way. And the same thing here, these light green ones, the same thing. They took that same idea, let's have a stimulus program to create new jobs, and they changed it. And so it went from here to here to here to here. All right, that's it for cultural diffusion.